Hello, writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, the day that I give you my tips and advice on the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. As always, we're answering a question from one of my $5 patrons on Patreon today, and today's question comes to us from Kakirtog, who asks, when do you stop world building? At what point does it become detrimental? At what point does it become too much? And in the question, Kakirtog talked specifically about Tolkien, how towards the end of his life was, doing things like geology samples for Middle-earth, and geography, and silt distribution across various rivers and lakes, and was not really producing any books. So was it wrong for Tolkien to just keep building the world and keep building the world and keep building the world and keep building the world? I mean, it depends on what you think of as wrong. Like, it's still pretty unquestionable that nobody has built a world as extensive and as complete from beginning to end as Middle-earth. Like, just very few people have put that much thought into the cultures of their world and the history and how it all came together and how everything works. There are examples of people who have attempted that, but they certainly don't seem to have resonated with as many people. And part of the reason that it does resonate with so many people is that the stories are so firmly, deeply rooted in that world that was built, right? Like, you get such a complete sense when you're reading Lord of the Rings that this is a whole place that you could just go and visit it anytime, because it's really there. And I mean, if that's what's important to you, if you want to create a place that is just that realistic, I mean, there's nothing wrong with world building for years or decades and only writing one trilogy about this very, very extensive and complete world that you have built. I mean, we can say there's nothing wrong with doing that because that's what Tolkien did. And like, those books don't not have problems, but they're also the Lord of the Rings. However, assuming that you want to be, a working writer, let's say a full-time author and earn a living from it, then the equation on world building becomes quite different. At some point, you need to figure out, from a business sense, how often you need to be producing whatever it is that you're producing, whether it's novels or short stories or novellas, probably novels in a series if you're writing fantasy, just off the top of my head. And then you need to monitor how much time you're spending on the world building and the preparation and the outlining, and as soon as that starts affecting the amount of production you're producing, that's when you might need to rein it in a little bit. Because that's when the artistic side of things, the pure creative muse just sort of letting your brain run wild, starts to interfere with the business side of things. And again, if this isn't your business and if you don't care about the business side of it, you just want to write these stories, that's fine. Take as much time as you want. But otherwise, do as much world building as you need to do to tell the story you want to tell. And this doesn't mean that you only invent things as you go and just sort of as you need them. That doesn't really work either, because then too many things can easily end up contradicting each other. You need to establish some basic ground rules. You need to establish some fundamental simple truths about the society in which you're writing and the world in which you're writing. And if there's magic, how does that work? And how does sci-fi, how does your sci-fi work? All that sort of stuff. But you need to start with some fundamentals and extrapolate out from that. And extrapolate out until you have so many different elements that you're like, if I combined these elements, that story would be amazing. Just keep an eye out that you're actually producing the story. Because if you're not producing the story, then you have a problem. There is such a thing as stopping world building too early, though, when you haven't figured out enough to really make your world seem real and authentic. And it's very hard to tell when you're at that point, but that's why you have beta readers and trusted friends and family who actually know what they're talking about and who you can give your work to and say, hey, thoughts? And if you don't have access to those friends or family, which some people don't, you go online and find a writing group and some other people who will trade work for you. You read their work, and they read your work. So in essence, start with the most basic fundamental building blocks of your universe. What makes it different? What makes it unique? What's really going to attract a reader to your story? And keep extrapolating out what that means. If magic exists, how has that shaped society? How are defensive structures built when people can throw fireballs at them? Keep on going and going and going with that until you feel like you know the world well enough that you can start telling a story within it without having to constantly be inventing and solving new problems with your world as you go. Although that is going to happen, but you need to get to the point at the beginning where you feel like it's not going to happen in order to get enough courage to start. Thank you so much for the question, Kakirtog. I hope that you found the answer helpful. A reminder to everybody else that my $5 patrons are the only ones who can request topics to cover in these videos, and they get the videos 2 weeks ahead of everybody else. So if that sounds interesting to you, check out my Patreon right over there. You can also find my last Writer Wednesday video right up there. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!